Name or not to name an alleged rapist? Well, that's the burning question that's divided the nation over the past few days in the wake of the Dros rape. The viral video shot moments after the act unhinged the country. It showed the suspect covered in blood, screaming his innocence over the anguished cries of the girl's mother. Social media users were quick to point out serious inconsistencies in how we, as the media, report rape, particularly in relation to the revealing of suspects' identities. Well, let's look at this a bit further now. I have with me William Bird from the Media Monitoring Africa, Advocate Buhle Tonise from Tonise Attorneys. We're also joined by some of our country's editors from various newsrooms, Sheldon Morais from EWN, Verashni Pillay from Power FM, and Val Boje from Pretoria News. I hope I didn't butcher your surname. Good evening to all of you. Thanks very much for your time. Let me start with you. I mean, you penned this piece that in many ways sort of put a cat among pigeons. What was your key concern, just for the sake of our viewers who didn't see the piece?
Key concern, I mean, there are a lot. This case touches on all of the major issues we deal with in South Africa, dealing with race, inequality, this disjuncture between what gets said in social media and what our media have to do and what our media can and can't do. And there's the sense that, our media, because of the horrific nature of this case, they should just go ahead and name the guy before, they'd follow due process. Now, whether you agree with the law or not is another thing, but the law is the law and you should adhere to it. So media that went ahead and named him before have broken the law. It's that simple.
The law is clear, Buhle, on this, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
What does it say?
You've seen maybe on a number of outlets it has indicated that they quote Section 154, subsection 2B of the Criminal Procedure Act. It's clear that nobody should publish any detailed information relating to a case that is mentioned in subsection 3 of Section 153, meaning that it's sexual offences. Now, the challenge with that is some people don't understand when it is said that even before the person appears in court, even after having appeared in court, they can't be mentioned before they have pleaded. Now, there's a whole lot of conflict going on, and confusion is understood because the accused appeared before court, his name was already mentioned. A lot of them got permission from the NPA before he has pleaded to go ahead and mention his name. So I believe that's where we need to focus on, and it needs to be clarified because you'd remember that South African law, most of the time, it hasn't been written or created around social media. So now with all these developments and civilization, that is coming on board, is our law ready? Are we able now to deal with these alleged inequalities or selective application of the law?
Your key concerns from just what has happened over the past week since this incident broke?
For us, it's been really a case of what do we do? Do we name the suspect or do we not name the suspect? And in the case of our newspaper, we've been guided by the law and we've stuck very closely to the law. And we've tried to shut out the noise that's going on all around us. And the most important consideration, I think, is that the case can proceed and that the case is fair and that in the end justice is done for the victim. And I think, that's been our focus throughout the discussions that we've had within our own newsroom.
I remember even you were bombarded by all these social media comments and questions about why you were being inconsistent.
I think in terms of the consistencies, the consistency's always been there. And I use the example in the newsroom as well of, I suppose, that a time someone was named before they pleaded in a rape case. The most famous one being Jacob Zuma, when, named in those, on that Sunday, in fact, in 2 newspapers, and what it means. And you discuss this within your newsroom. I think much like Val, up until the point of getting a judicial or some sort of official go-ahead, it's quite clear. Cut out the noise up until then. And there's a lot of noise. I mean, social media amplifies that. But to be consistent, and it's sometimes hard, where you've then got to, and our homework is marked in public as the media, and we've got to be able to explain that as well. But what I think is really interesting for me is similar to the Oscar Pistorius case, where now a legal matter is thrust into the spotlight, or at least a matter that concerns the country is thrust into the spotlight, and what you then get is questioning the law, understanding the law, going to that section 153 and 154 as well. When you say any information, does it relate to the whole crime? Does it relate only to the identity? How do you then report on that? And I think the public does play an important part in terms of questioning the media's consistency. Because I think there is inconsistency, and let's not forget the media isn't represented by one group. But what we do as media houses is very important to how we're perceived by the public. And I think it is important that they hold us to account in instances like this.
I mean, for people like you who play a great deal in that sort of public space, and that is also full of, anonymous, people, some of whom may well be driven by very particular agendas. You may not be. I don't know if you were able to push back in the same way that Valerie at Pretoria News was able to, for example, because they can publish their newspaper the following day, even though they do have social media as well. But for you, that's a great part of what you do.
Yes, certainly in broadcast, the feedback, or rather the pushback, is more immediate and very heated. Not that it isn't for someone like Val, but it is certainly more immediate for us. But I think Buhle would agree that the law is a living document. If we want to change certain legislation, let's go through the steps to do that. If we feel that legislation is not suitable to our society at present, but do not ask us as the media to make a unilateral decision to break the law. Two wrongs don't make a right. So if we, as Power 987, had chosen to disclose that name before a court or magistrate or the NPA said we could, which we believe we got that go-ahead yesterday, and we started naming him from yesterday. But we couldn't, because of public pressure, choose to break the law. Even though we acknowledge double standards, we acknowledge racial discrepancies, we acknowledge all these things, and we want to be part of the change as media, as a station, but we can't do that by illegal means.
Well, Buhle made an interesting point that the outrage, I can't remember the word you actually used, was kind of understood, and maybe it's time we look at the existing laws.
Yes, it is understood. However, it's very worrying that you look at our society, we are reactionaries most of the time. Nobody takes time to understand the justice system up until something happens. And when that happens, there's always emotions involved. Because remember, with courts, they deal with these matters day in, day out. So it is only that particular matter that gets media attention, that you would think everybody wants to know about it. But then they can never be as neutral as the courts would be. Looking into how to go about changing the justice system currently is that we need society involved, because in this particular aspect, remember, in a court of law, during the trial proceedings in a criminal case, the court doesn't really care what society says. They deal with the evidence. It is only after a person has been declared an offender, when you look at the sentence, that you consider the society. So now, is society prepared to accept that when they make these comments even before a person is tried? Because they've already convicted him before the actual trial. Okay, let's get some questions. We have Anonymous from Rustenburg. Anonymous, your question, comment?
Yes, I would like to place a comment to say that, obviously what happened to this poor 7-year-old girl is atrocious. And yes, we have got laws in this country that says that your name cannot be made public until you've pleaded. And that is a law that we all have to respect. But I think it's time that we respect the humanity of the victims. And I think it's time that we respect the rights of the victim and not protect the rights of the alleged perpetrator. Now, from the footage and stuff that I've seen, this specific person was totally out of control. He was bleeding. I'm not sure why he was bleeding. And clearly, there is a case to be made that something untoward happened. And, if we want to get lawlessness out of this country, we have to not necessarily name and shame, but we need to name, and then it's for the courts to decide whether the person is guilty or not guilty of the alleged offence.
Okay.
But it's important for the community to know that a person that is suspected of a perpetration like this, his name become known to the public.
Okay. All right, thank
And,
you. Well, Anonymous William saying we don't have to name and shame.
Well, I don't know if that's what he was saying entirely, but I guess the point is there. We need to be asking, why are we focusing so much on the perpetrator, when we should be looking at the issue of child sexual assault? 64 children are sexually assaulted every day, and those are the figures that the police have. You know, if you talk to the organizations that work in these areas, it's significantly higher than that. So why this particular thing, and why this particular man are we going after him? And is it somehow, like, what are we achieving in going on saying, oh, we must beat him, we must kill him, we must do this? Is that going to help us solve issues of sexual violence against children, against women? How does it advance us? And critically, that's where the role of the media comes in. I think for them to be playing the role of the social media, which is to heighten and arouse excitement and anger and violence, I'm not sure that that's that helpful. Media have to have a bigger role to play in that.
And I'm sure, Val, that's exactly what you meant when you say you had to focus on the issue and try and filter the noises, actually focus on what was most important.
I think the caller now, I think he raises the point that probably is pretty much a majority view. We all are horrified by what happened. There's not a single person who's not horrified. But does naming the accused make any difference? You know, can we not just focus on the procedure, allow the police to finish their investigations, allow there to be a proper case prepared, and then he must answer that case? But I think the general attitude of the public, and even some public figures, has been literally to already have convicted him when the case hasn't even started. This case still has a long way to go. It has a long way to go. And I think in the process, we can certainly have a look at, does the law suit us well? Are newspapers and radio and TV stations hampered by a law when social media is going crazy? How do you control social media? It's a very difficult thing. But I honestly don't believe that any of this is helping the victim or the victim's family, or protecting future victims. And I think that needs to be the focus of all the decisions that we make.
I see you dying to say something, but I'm going to ask you to hold your thoughts right there. Let's go to Cape Town now, where Bongani is standing by. Bongani, your question, comment?
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Fine. No, I disagree with the panel especially the gentleman and the lady. You know, when these things are happening, if it was, this thing goes to a race issue, Vuyo, because if it was a black person who did that in Dros, and I'm speaking of experience, it was going to be a name, he was going to be named and shamed immediately after the incident happened. But because it's a certain race group, now they are trying to defend him because of the color of his skin. I'm not trying to be racist or anything, my brother, but look at the bigger picture here. Because how many perpetrators have we been found doing these things? And then the following day, you know who it is. You know who raped this child. Today we are talking about the family, but we don't care about the person, the perpetrator, because this person is the person who's a certain race.
Okay.
Thanks for you.
Thanks, Bongani. Verashni? There.
I think there is a palpable rage in our society about two things here. The one is racism and the double standards that black people face in this country. That is a real injustice. That is a real problem. The other is about the scourge of rape in our society. This case has brought together these two furies, in a sense. And it's almost as if we're misdirecting our legitimate rage and anger as a society. What we should really be asking is, how are we balancing being objective as a media? If you want to direct attention of the media, yes, bring it on. The media need your attention. We need your critique. Ask us, how are we treating black and white people equally in our coverage? Ask us that, and let us answer you. Secondly, ask us, how do we track the scourge that is sexual violence in our society 365 days a year, not just 16 days a year, not just when there is a particularly shocking rape. All rape is shocking. The fact that there's been such an explosion of emotion and feeling over this rape shows that we wait until we're shocked before we act, and that is not okay as a society. So yes, hold us to account, but don't pick on things that we cannot change, like the law. We cannot break the law. We just cannot do that. Some people chose to do that, but we can be held legitimately to account. Let us direct our energy and our rage as a society towards things that will have a long-lasting effect when it comes to racism and when it comes to sexual violence.
Sheldon?
I think to add a third dynamic to that, I think there's a lack of trust in the criminal justice system. So I think had there been a greater trust in the criminal justice system, and it links to Verashni's point about tied into race. You know, you saw it in a number of cases that white suspects, people in the dock, may get off. You know, you can buy your way through things. So I think there's a general irritation, annoyance, deep anger with the criminal justice system. So if there was trust in the justice system, I suppose we can only extrapolate. It may say, look, we understand the legal steps that are there. We may not like them, but we understand them because we have trust that as this case progresses through the whole system, from the point of arrest to the point of judgment, in whichever way it may be, and then sentencing if it is guilty, that there is trust, that there won't be bungling, that we know these cases are coming through. And I think rightfully and somewhat, you know, you could also argue wrongly, some of that anger is then, you know, being directed towards the media, some of it warranted as well. But it's actually a toxic mixture of a number of these things. And what actually ends up happening is we do, as William said, lose sight of there's a 6-7-year-old girl, right, who is just one of many who has been, you know, her life has been changed forever. You know, and how do we address that to tell the story of the young girls, the young women, you know, who are being abused, who are being raped on a daily basis, because that in and of itself is an important story that we should be telling, whether it be on a daily basis, whether it be on an ongoing basis. It is something that we should be telling and not possibly focusing and navel gazing on, you know, how the conduct is necessarily coming about and you know, dealing with the actual issues that face our country on a daily basis.
Buhle, your thoughts on the role of the criminal justice system? Yes, we can talk, we know what is, but perhaps a need for the practitioners within that particular area to actually look at these things and the optics of it all, because it brings me to the whole Mcebo Dlamini versus Nicholas Ninow king, where he waltzes into court like all free, whereas Mcebo Dlamini was a free fees must fall activist, was in chains, you know. And isn't the consistency or lack of, isn't that an issue that needs to be addressed just as importantly as the other issues?
We certainly cannot deny the fact that there's also inconsistency in the justice system. It is said that sometimes people don't have confidence in it because they have proof and have seen instances whereby one is treated better than the other. So the justice system in South Africa, the manner in which it is designed, it is not designed to be more a cushion to one particular race and be thorns to the other. However, we must remember that if this is a problem that is in society, people that implement the justice systems well are part of that society. So it goes back to say, what kind of society are we? What kind of individuals are we grooming? So from my side, I personally would say I understand. However, it goes back to saying again, as a member in society now, not as an officer of court or someone who implements justice, I have a responsibility that not only when it benefits me do I keep quiet about these injustices, it must be consistent with me as an individual first. And then I can expect the second person to be consistent as well.
Val?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was interesting to me was that I found the comments that came from the NPA around naming the suspect or not naming the suspect confusing. You know, on the one hand, we were told, please be circumspect in the way you report on this case. There was criticism of journalists who'd gone to the crime scene. Please, you know, there was another message that came out from government along the same lines. And then the next thing, the NPA is saying, here, name him, go for it. Our feeling with that, just to go back to that, was let the court decide. let it be a court ruling. We were among the people who'd applied to take a photograph in court, and that was approved, and the photograph was taken in court. Let that be the way that we approach it. When it comes to whether suspects should be shackled or not shackled, I mean, obviously, I think there should be a fair treatment, whatever that treatment is. I'm not sure why in one case. I think sometimes it has to do with where the court is, where the holding rooms are, you know, how the accused gets to court. It's some sort of practical matters like that that are
Let's
take
Anonymous from Johannesburg. Anonymous, your question, comment?
Hi, how are you?
Well, thank you.
Very quickly, I think we've touched on this, but I just wanted to pose a question to the panel, specifically around the fact that we spent about 70% of this conversation talking about the merits of whether we should name or not name the perpetrator. Do they deem it appropriate that today we're talking about the perpetrator, not the victim? And how are we going to make sure that there's no victims anymore? Thank you.
Wants to go first?
That's the point. You know, we should be focusing on the victims and survivors rather than them. Also, bear in mind, you know, this idea of we should name him, we should go after him. The overwhelming majority of the cases are not committed by these kinds of horrible, hideous, despicable scumbags. They are committed by horrible, hideous scumbags who are our fathers, our uncles, our brothers, our cousins. So then you say, well, just go ahead and name them. But you can't, because ultimately you need to protect the victims and survivors here. So to their credit, our media haven't released the name of the 7-year-old girl. And let me be clear about something. 10, 15 years ago, there was no guarantee of that at all. You know, we know this because we've been monitoring exactly this sort of thing for the last 15 years. So to suggest now, now we should do it because it's on social media and we're all angry and we want to get upset about it, well, fine, get angry, get upset. Turn that into some useful action. Go and do something. Go and demand practices change at Dros and every other family establishment restaurant. Go and demand what you're going to do about the people that you know in your community who are doing these things to their children and their wives and girlfriends.
Maybe Buhle can remind us why we have these laws in the first instance, what they are there to actually do. Because maybe we lose sight in the heat of the moment.
I had quite a discussion with members of the NPA who deal with the sexual offences on a day-to-day basis. And it was clear that the purpose of this particular legislation, it is to protect the victim. If you would read through the Criminal Procedure Act, the Section 153, the 158, 170A, you'd see that it deals with minors and people who are mentally challenged. Now, the challenge here is, it is said that we all tend to focus now on the accused person, but it is not meant to be that way. It is meant to protect the victim. Now, the question that we should be asking now is, why is it that there needs to be laws in place to protect a victim when he or she needs to go back to society? They should be feeling proud to go back because they know they have the support, but not to be scared because there will be a discussion on who's right, who's supposed to be doing this, how is this one going to be treated. So these laws being created for us and having to look and to make sure that they are implemented correctly, it needs all of us, including the media, everyone, to work on them. And these injustices, they can only be sorted out when we do understand that the laws are created for the people and not people are created for the law.
Okay, let's have Soli from Randfontein. What do you have to say, sir?
Hello.
Yes. Your question? Comment?
Thank you. This thing of protecting and trying to say we protect the victim is very out of order. Reason being, when you go to the courts, you find that the relatives are there of the victim, the friends are there of the victim, so the identity will be known to everybody else. And coming to the perpetrator, if you don't name or shame the perpetrator, that case can easily vanish because of money laundering. That case can vanish because nobody has been named, nobody's been shamed, and now money has been exchanged, and the case is gone, missing, and nobody gets apprehended because the case ends there where money is. So, in my view, it's very important that we should weigh our options carefully if we say we want to protect the victim. Because protecting the victim, like today's case, everybody was there, I was myself there, and we could see the parents, we could see the family there. So the victim is already known. So what is the argument then? Because there's no such a thing that you protect the victim.
Okay, thanks. You disagree with both of you.
Yeah, well, with the Criminal Procedure Act, like I said, the problem is that we get not to know about these laws only when something happens. The CPA, Criminal Procedure Act, is quite clear. There are instances whereby, like this one, when there's a minor involved, the proceedings are held in camera. It is the duty of the NPA to apply that there is a minor child, and we believe that parties that are not relevant to this matter should not be part of the court proceedings. It was very wrong for them to see these victims where you know that they're vulnerable. They were supposed to not even have known that the victim is there. I think Section 170A even goes as far as providing intermediaries, whereby the witness doesn't even go to court. They give evidence through a third party, and that is allowed in law. However, most of the time, we don't get to know these things because they don't get as much media attention. And sometimes families don't even know that they have the right to ask the NPA to actually apply that the matters be heard in camera.
William?
Yeah, I mean, actually, we've just come from a Supreme Court ruling involving the Centre for Child Law about naming and identifying victims of criminal, involved in criminal acts. And it's now changed such that before, media could, ironically, identify victims. They couldn't identify an accused or a witness, but they could identify victims. Now there's a little bit more clarity about you can't identify victims or witnesses or accused. And this is specifically because you need to protect the rights of children. And that's aimed at engendering that. And you can ask our media in South Africa. They know this section of the law very well.
But let's just go to Ngumbu in Polokwane. Your question, comment, Ngumbu?
Hi. I just want to firstly applaud the media for not naming the victim. But, you know, we need to face the truth. Yes, you are right when you say the life of this 7-year-old has changed drastically, and that can never be reversed. But how can we help this young girl? You know, by naming the perpetrator. Let's be honest, what came to most people's mind when they heard that there's a rape case? Obviously, most of the people, you know, if we have to ask one or two people in the panel there, what came to their head was that it was a black person who has committed a rape. No one ever thought maybe it was a white person. But naming this perpetrator is going to give an alarm to South Africans to wake up, to realize that even white male, they are mad, they are sick in their head, they are capable of raping young girls, 7 years old. So I think that the media in this, they are not fair, right? Because most of the time you take risk with politicians. Sunday Times have been sued by Jacob Zuma before by naming things that there was the law, it was against the law. Why don't you want to protect the 7-year girl and help other children so that people can wake up and realize that this sickness of raping, even white people, can also rape young children? Thank you.
No?
Okay, that's an interesting call. I think this has been a criticism, you know, because the perpetrator is white. It's got nothing to do with the perpetrator being white. It's just following the law. And when the time is right, the perpetrator will be named. He will be named throughout the court proceedings. He will be named. It was just a matter of waiting until it was legally correct to name him. Some of newspapers decided, obviously, to name him before he had appeared in court this week, and that's their right. Rape is a thing that crosses the color line. I don't think you can say that rape is only a thing that belongs to any particular group of society. As William said, it can happen within families. It can happen like this. It's not about whether the perpetrator is black or white. It's about the fact that you have somebody who is accused of an horrific rape and you have a child that is damaged as a result. And I agree that, you know, we need to have a look as the media, not just at this court case and what this court case tells us, but at the broader issue of rape within society.
Sheldon?
I think what we you know, there's being aware of what's happened, the microcosm of this incident. But I also think there's something to the anger that has come out. For instance, in the call that you got there to say, you know, the face of rape. And we've got to realize that in South Africa, crime, and we've been a part of it as the media. Again, we've got to be aware of the part we have played in terms of the face that crime has been given. And I think a lot of the anger came out. So it's not necessarily then going to break the law. I think that's one thing in and of itself, and you've got to deal with that. However, once the dust from this has settled, I think one thing that we as the media need to take away and say, actually, how do the different words we choose, the semantics, even down to that level, how do they differ when you do deal with, and it's not just in the case of crimes and alleged perpetrators. It's also when people are the victims. I'll give you an example, and I mean it's an age-old one, where a white girl goes missing and a black girl goes missing. You name the white girl, but you don't name the black girl. And these are arguments. I'm not saying that this actually happens, but these are arguments that are sometimes put to the media. Around the time Winnie Madikizela Mandela died, there was one argument that it was just you just used her name as plainly as possible. However, I think if you remember, was it Pam Golding, the real estate agent, and wording around Doyen. And suddenly, how does this person, and I think it goes to the very narrative of how people are treated in society. So I think that is something that we shouldn't lose sight of while sticking to the law, never breaking the law, because I think we set an example as the media. But there is something for us to take away to say, what if the words, when do we start humanizing people within the process? So if a black girl goes missing from Alex, she may not come from a family with influence who are able to rally the media and get spokespeople up and, get a social media campaign up. And, but how do you treat her versus possibly a girl from Sandton going missing and the like? Because I do think that at times we as the media are guilty of that, and we've got to, be honest about that at times.
Okay, let's squeeze in another call. Ronelle is in Cape Town. Your question, comment, Ronelle?
My comment for you, good evening to the whole panel and yourself. I would like to say that this is not a race issue. This is not a racial issue at all. This boils down to somebody raping a child. It's an abominable act. I don't care who you are, and I don't care if they publicize your face all over the newspapers. Quite frankly, I want them to be surgically castrated. I want them to be turned into eunuchs when they are convicted of a crime. That is what I think needs to happen.
Verashni?
I have to ask South Africans, what will vigilantism and mob justice achieve us in stemming sexual violence? The numbers show us that sexual violence isn't an aberration in our society. It's become a norm. It's happening in families, in neighborhoods. It's happening everywhere. These are not monsters. When we demonize rapists and say that we must go after them with pitchforks and torches, that does not address the illness in our society that gives rise to these shocking, horrific crimes. To do that, we've got to listen to the experts. We've got to listen to the rape crisis of this world, the Lisa veterans of the world, the people who have been doing lots of research on rape in our society, on sexual violence in our society, and ask what are the solutions, and to learn how to deal through the justice system, through a variety of means with people who have I want to say sinned, because it is a sin. I think a lot of South Africans are feeling this kind of outrage because it feels like such a sin to them, but have broken the law, have harmed their fellow citizens. How do we address this? Because we have one of the highest rates of sexual violence in the world. And going after these shock cases where there's a rapist that we then demonize, and let me say, an alleged rapist. We don't know if he actually committed the crime. Yes, we've got video evidence, but how would you feel if you or your best friend or your mother or your father was accused of a crime and was not allowed to go through the criminal process and be granted a fair chance to plead their side of the story, and the mob just came after them? That's not fair.
Willem, quickly, one thing you're taking away from this?
We need to be looking for solutions and talking about prevention of violence against children, particularly. There's the thing there, the future, blah, blah, blah. They're the here, the now. We need to be saying, how do we prevent violence against them? This anger that's not directed in any other direction other than suggesting we should go after them and hunt them down and kill them doesn't prevent violence. Violence begets violence. And that means we need to talk to our politicians. When was the last time you heard any politician of any ilk say, sit down with your child and read? When your child has a problem, don't hit them, talk to them about it. That's when you're going to start to shift dynamics.
Your final thoughts, Buhle?
I believe that the justice system is in South Africa is well equipped to deal with these crimes. However, it needs assistance from society. As much as they would try, there's still influences. When I say influences from society, I don't mean the actual dealing of the trial, but anything that involves the trial outside court. The court doesn't have maximum control over it, but can only deal with the after effects. So in this manner, even though it's a minor child, I know the courts have dealt with thousands of cases like this, and I believe that it's in good hands. It doesn't really need influence from social media to be a conviction. The courts can do it.
Val?
I think as opposed to social media where people can just say whatever they like without any restraint, I think that the media, the newspapers, radio, TV, have a very important role, and I think that we should follow this case and, so that the public knows what happened and try to understand, what leads to this kind of thing happening and what are the broader issues, as Sheldon said, within society.
Sheldon?
I think for me it's just the basic principles that underpin journalism are more important now than ever. And it may not be popular, to name the guy, but how do you go about getting to that decision and making it clear to your audience? In an age of social media, I think that noise can clutter you, but I think that noise is also important, so it's about listening.
Yeah.
I think it would be naive not to acknowledge at the end of the panel that racism is real, that there are double standards in the media. I absolutely acknowledge that. That is true. But let's address one issue at a time here.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's a conversation that won't end with this particular episode or case. And that's our show for tonight. News is next.